it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be Catholic. It was more, hey, I'm just going to read this stuff and see where it leads me. So some of the books I was reading, I mean, C.S. Lewis, I read Mere Christianity, Abolition of Man.
Great book.
Like, oh, okay, these are really, really interesting. Then I somewhat recently read a book by Stephen C. Meyer, maybe. He's done on some podcasts with the Daily Wire guys, too. He's a physicist. And I think it's his most recent book called Return of the God Hypothesis. And he talks about how you can prove the existence of God through science, whereas every other scientist is going to tell you, no, we're all atheists and, God doesn't exist. And so that book was really, really interesting. I don't think he's Catholic, but it was just super. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm even more. This is true. And then I listened to several times William Lane Craig and Ben Shapiro had a Sunday conversation, and I got to read more of this. But then as I'm talking I'm like, Knowles is making his own arguments on his show for why the Catholic Church is the one true church. Like, yeah, that is true. And one of the best lines he says, and he quotes it from somebody else, is, there's no other institution that could be run with such naval imbecility that would last the fortnight. But the Catholic Church has lasted, even with all the scandals and bad leaders and bad things. Then it's the church. And all the other denominations. Hey, what do you know, guys? When you look back, it came from the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And then I started to go to RCIA class maybe like 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm just, at that time when I decided to go to that class, totally, I'm like, I'm in. This makes sense. I'm in. This is the one true church. And now I love the RCIA class I'm going to. And now even more. And I want to read the Summa Theologiae by Thomas Aquinas. The deacon who's teaching the class just gave me one of Scott Hahn's books. I forget the name of it.
Supper of the Lamb?
Yeah. I think it was that one.
That's always the big one that people read.
He also mentioned Four Cups.
Okay. Yeah, that is one as well.
The one that I've heard about Scott Hahn was Rome Sweet Home. But he didn't necessarily recommend that one, but I want to read those books.
I think that was one of his early ones.
Okay.
So he wasn't as like a seasoned writer
as
he was. The one that people always talk about that you have to read is, I think, Supper of the Lamb.
Okay.
I did read that one, and it is quite a fantastic book.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love how, like, it's just like the church, like when you were a Catholic, it kind of just stopped happening. And then just through an innocent pursuit of knowledge, it just came to be again.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, all right, I need a religion. What am I doing? I'm just going to start reading books. It's like, oh, this is interesting. Mm-hmm. Oh, wait, this is interesting. And it's kind of like led you just straight back to him. It's just so awesome.
It did. And I think some of it is, I love politics. I'm into politics. Is when I look at politics, and Knowles will say this, at its core, it's a theological issue. You either think that there's an objective truth in the world, or you think, that this table is like a chair, or you think the table's a TV. And, well, if there's an objective truth out there, then it comes from God. Mm-hmm. Where in the subjective world, you're your own God.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work. Society just breaks down. Like, you can't have a conversation that if I think this is a chair and you think it's a TV and you think it's a fish, then we can't talk to one another.
Right. Yeah, I've always loved that aspect of the argument, because it really is you have to look for what is the most extraordinary claim out there, right? And the most extraordinary claim out there is the resurrection, right? If the resurrection is true, it really does defy the inexistence of all the other things that are obviously false, right? Yeah. And it's such an extraordinary claim when you look at it, and if you really truly believe in it, it's just yes, the Catholic Church is the only thing that can make sense. We had another guest on here, Simon, who, a fantastic guest. He was talking a similar thing, not obviously the same journey, because everyone has their own journey, but he was talking about how one of the things that really made it clear to him was, as you said, it was that continuity from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's why it didn't make sense to become non-denominational or Protestant or any one of those different things. It was this was the continuity started from the beginning. Yeah. And the continuity has always been there. Yeah. Right? Great. It's just a good point.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting with some of those different denominations that I somewhat looked into. There were just there would always be this one glaring thing that I thought, that doesn't make sense. Like with the Calvinists. Not that I've studied John Calvin, but yet you're predestined. Well, then there's no free will. Then, to me, what's the point of even trying to be a good person if you're predestined? Then it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Or Plants with Aquinas had a couple of guys, I think, that were Mormon, and they talked about that faith and how they are now Catholic, and how that just seemed really weird with this one guy who was kind of this weird dude who was trying to scam people, and he just I'm like, okay, then that's not it. And then you've got all these other denominations. I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. You all come from one place, like you were saying.